Hey, Patreon contributors, thanks for joining us for the spoiler talk for Pandora, the Pandora Room by Christopher Golden. Why do they even mention two jars?
Well, yeah, I think early on it's so that like I see it. Like I could see it in my mind. Early on in the book, you're gonna be like, well, is all of this over nothing? What is all the goodness in the jars? Is it just like a little love note to the world? You know what I mean? Like that you could have
Yeah.
a huge conflict that turns out to be over quite literally nothing. But realistically, you know it's gonna be bad. But there were points late in this book where I started thinking like maybe there are good things in that jar and you have to get through this really bad stuff to get it. Like maybe all the people that suffered from the lesions and the disease were going to wind up being like immune to all illnesses
Like
afterward.
immortal?
Well, yeah, but like in my mind, I was starting to like how would I handle this? Like the two jars or whatever, and it would be something like that. Like this was the good jar. This one put you through trials, and if you made it through, you'd probably still die of natural causes, but you know what I mean? You would have a very healthy life or something along those lines. But no, it was just straight up bad shit.
No.
Straight up bad shit.
Here's one thing that I thought while we were talking, while we were describing the book, that I think would have made it a much more uh, um, interesting story, like a much more exciting story.
Okay.
What if they found the good one, but like you are so overburdened with good things that it's actually bad for you? Like,
Oh, see, that
you know
would
what
have
I'm
been an
saying?
interesting way to go. Yeah.
Like people
Yeah.
fall in love with you, but they become so obsessed that they
Mhm.
like they won't let anybody, if I can't have you all to myself, then no one can, like that kind of shit. Like what if like the good was so overwhelmingly good that it eventually, became kind of more terrifying than if it was just like a plague or something.
Man, we could do this all night on, on ways this book could have gone.
Could have gone
differently.
better.
Sure, yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I thought it was kind of neat. And again, I don't know, and I didn't look into. I mentioned this in the regular review. Like, is there any thought out there? Has anyone found something that was like, oh no, you got that Pandora's box thing all wrong? There are two boxes, because that would make the initial story a little more interesting, right?
Yeah.
Introducing a second jar would have been interesting in this book. I mean,
I
there are a
mean,
lot of things that could have happened.
they fucking promised us a jar in the synopsis, B in the beginning of the book, and then C when fucking Dr. Tang is having a smoke
Yep.
and there's a crack in the wall. You're like, well, here comes the second jar. You have to wait another fucking like 30% of the book to find out, nope, it's just a river.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about this fucking jar. So it does all like and for lack of a better term, I'll call it all the Ebola type stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
you bleed from your eyeballs and you have sores and whatever. And I don't know if that's exactly what Ebola does, but it does what every single like pandemic outbreak movie or TV show has ever done, right? But it also does something else. And I don't fucking get it, man. You see ghosts so at first I thought, okay, maybe that's unrelated to the jar. Like maybe once they broke into that room, they can now just see. And I wasn't thinking of them as ghosts, but like
Like an odd manifestation of some kind.
yeah, like just seeing what happened in the past versus I think we talked about this on the time travel episode, right? Like the ability to go back.
Oh yeah,
and
like
observe,
time slips.
like yeah, like that you were just observing something that happened. So that's not it. They're more of a traditional ghost. Like they know that you're looking at them. Like if you make noise, like they turn and look at you. But then they can crawl into your body and possess you. And I'm just fucking confused. Like what? I know there was almost like an explanation in there. At one point they were talking about like priests being able to pull all the bad stuff out of people, and I guess that's what they put in the fucking jar. But really, it was completely lost on me.
Yeah, well, they spent like 3 pages explaining where the jar came from Lamar's crazed notebook, right? And in that's when Dr. Tang figured out, who's not an archaeologist or a anthropologist, who would have like the right knowledge for this, figured that all out. that somehow, but the explanation was a little shitty because it was like, they figured out how to like pull all the bad sins out of you and stuff like that, or the bad impulses.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow that also created the plague.
Yeah, sure.
But they're separate things. Like the plague, like you could have the plague without seeing the ghosts. But then, like, once you have the plague, you're going to see the ghosts, and then they can ride you around like a fucking monkey or whatever. So, yeah, the mechanics of it, I don't think Christopher Golden was, like, super concerned about, like, the physics of, or the, you know, like, the actual mechanics of how this works. It was an interesting, I will give him this. It was interesting in a thing where he could have just introduced a plague that he also introduced separately, like kind of being infected by the bad vibes. However, combining the two, I think, was a horrible mistake.
Yeah, it didn't play well, and that's really, really unfortunate.
It was like if it was like something that would happen in a movie that was basically like a low budget Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Like the later Mummy movies or something.
And let's not kid ourselves, right? And the person, I'm not going to say that did it first or that did it best, right? But this had that Dan Brown kind of feel to it, right?
It did.
Like a little less solving the mystery, but that kind of like, here's a thing that you know, and now I'm going to tell you that this thing that you know isn't exactly right. And here's a story that happens when people figure out that the story they know isn't exactly right. Yep. Which is a fine premise, and I've enjoyed many books that are built on that premise. This one just it had its fingers in too many pies.
Yeah, it was, and it was polydactyl at the same time. Like there was more fingers than the average person.
Yeah. Well, and then you've got the whole military thing going on. Yeah. You know, the Kurdish, or I'm sorry, the jihadi attack. Was like a whole nother layer, and I don't know. Now, what I will say is I was getting really excited towards the end of this because this book just wasn't doing it for me. But when Walker gets infected, I actually thought, what could redeem this book? And I was like, killing the fucking main character.
Hero. Yeah.
Kill the hero would redeem this book. And then it didn't happen. And then they're on a ship. They've been saved, and they're on a ship. And he decides that he has done the wrong thing by trying to take it back to his government, to the American government. So I was like, here's another chance to kill the hero.
Yep.
And he didn't do it again. So, but there were a couple times where I was like, oh, okay, all right. The whole rest of the story gets better if he takes the really brave approach, which I'm not saying that, you know, that's a way to make your book better or whatever. But in this case, I thought that would probably turn me around on this book a little bit.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen.
Well, he wants Ben Walker for his next. So I'm going to go off on a little tangent. So I was talking to Jesse and Misty about what we were reading, and I texted a description to them, and I'm going to read you the text really quick. And then I'm going to get back to a point I was going to make. So I told him what the book was, and I said, I discovered about 40 pages in that there are characters from another book he wrote called Ararat in this book. Doesn't seem like a sequel, though, but similar stories. Ararat is a supernatural horror about discovering Noah's Ark, but things go bad. This is a supernatural horror about discovering Pandora's box, but things go bad. So
that's pretty accurate. Now, make your point.
The killing, was it the killing? I totally lost my point. I have a thought though. So, first of all, he never would have been able to get up off of that, you know, that gurney or whatever, and like beat up 4 guards and wrestle through like basically the entire Navy to throw that shit in the water. Another squandered opportunity is that kind of post-credit scene at the end of the book where like we're looking at the jar at the bottom of the sea, and all it does is make the fish do exactly the same thing that we read for like 100 pages.
Oh yeah.
What if something different happened there? You know, like what if like he took that opportunity to evolve the story somehow? He didn't. He just rehashed it with fish instead of people. But like there was a chance to do something cool there.
Do you remember? I agree with you, and I want to give the great example of this. I think is a great example. We could do it because we didn't have spoiler talk at the time. Dan Brown Inferno, was that the one we reviewed?
Yeah, we did.
Do you remember what happened at the end of that book?
Not super well.
So it all fizzled out. The guy's bomb detonated, but nothing happened.
Yeah.
And then we find out afterwards that what he was working on was a way to make people sterile, like half the population not be able to reproduce. So kind of like what you're saying, you took it and you gave it a like the world is saved, but is it?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I thought that played real well in that book, and it still sticks in my mind to this day as a great ending. But like the world has changed, even though on the surface it isn't. And again, like you said, right, the fish are infected. So what happens from there?
Yeah, or it could even just be like a different interpretation of what the jar is. Like,
sure,
if because humans are shitty by nature, shitty things happen to them. But since fish are pretty mundane and just chill about shit, like what if like their lives just got a little better and the jar reacts to the people or something like that? Like, you know what I'm saying? There was an opportunity to just like strengthen the story, because otherwise just don't fucking show the fish. I didn't need to see those fish.
I think that there's probably a career for you and I in something that hasn't been developed yet, where we just do this, like not editing, not whatever. You just give us your manuscript and we're like, no, this fucking thing with the 2 jars, either get rid of it or make the fucking jars worth something. Like, you know what I mean?
Because like that fish ending I mentioned would explain the 2 jars, because
that's true.
Two different societies saw the same jar, but they had a different reaction. They thought there were 2 different jars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. I do, genuinely. That's what I'm saying. There's something in there for how to.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, I guess we'll wrap it up by our review. I didn't think it was poorly written. It was pretty linear. Like I said, there's some plot points that may have only made sense to Christopher Golden. You know.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, it was fine.
Now I have a big bone I actually have a big bone to pick that I didn't mention. But I think it's something that it doesn't spoil anything. So I think I'm going to talk about it back on the normal podcast. It's about the cancer.
Here, I guess we'll talk about. Let's all right. So there's something, because again, I don't know much on this. So people who are listening to this are looking for bonus content. So let's give them some bonus content. If you are going to develop your characters and give them a backstory, you know when you should do that, Rob? Do you know when the best time to do that is?
When's that?
Not 75% of the way into the book. So as people got sicker, right, we'd start seeing like these flashes about their family and their whatever, and these are like periphery characters.
Yeah.
So kind of tying in a little bit, I think, into what you were going to say. At least that came up early, and then maybe a little too often.
Very much.
But at least that
often,
was introduced from the onset, and not a Corporal so and so, probably 75% of the way into the book, was the cough was really coming on, and he thought about summers with his family, and in the, what I mean?
And it's like I can't I'm reading that and I'm thinking, okay, so Christopher Golden, and I apologize to Christopher Golden because this is nothing personal. You just happen to be the book we're reading. It's like he wrote a story, and as he was going through like a draft, he was like looking at a checklist, and he saw like characterization ? And like he realized, oh, you know what, this is kind of a stiff 2-dimensional character, let's throw a flashback in a scared moment or something. And it's like, oh fuck, man, like there's nothing organic about that. It and it happened all the time,
repeatedly. Yep.
Oh, it was so grating. It was like a fucking like all right, I'm done. So I think we could wrap it up. We could jump back over to our normal stuff, right?
Absolutely. Big thanks to all you Patreon contributors for putting your hard-earned money into this podcast. We appreciate you, and we love you, in spite of the fact that no one took me up on my offer to review Yale James' book. But we'll talk about that more over on Book Proper.